The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Hello and welcome to Fantasy NBA Today. My name is Adrian Benjamins and I'm joined by Coach. And this episode is brought to you by Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company. Get some delicious coffee. Head over to hawaiianisles.com and Amazon and taste the Kona difference. Coach, how are you doing on this lovely Friday morning?
Yo, Adrian, how are you, my man? I am doing well. I just actually took a sip of this delicious coffee, the Hawaiian Isle Kona coffee, and just looking forward to a Friday and a weekend of another great NBA Finals Game 2.
Yes, hey, we got to get right into it, man. Let's talk about that Game 1. Coach, so let's start with before the game. My prediction was Warriors in 6 or 7. You know, I thought that they would likely split these two games in Toronto. Toronto getting the win here. Coach, they looked fantastic, man. They played great defense, got great games out of Marc Gasol. Van Vliet played good. Pascal Siakam with a 30-point full stat game was unbelievable. So, Coach, I guess my question is, can the Raptors, can they keep it up? Can they play like this all series? What are your thoughts on this, Coach?
Well, I'll tell you what, man. They were fantastic. There's no question about it. I mean, there was a stretch there where Kawhi was pretty quiet, and the rest of the guys all stepped up. It was very impressive. They are peaking at the right time. The Van Vliets, and just all the players that are coming in contributing. So, I felt prior to the everything starting, the finals, I felt very confidently that unless KD did come back, I thought Toronto could beat them. I said Toronto in 7 without KD. If KD comes back, I would take Golden State in 6. I think he's that important to the team. Cousins is pretty much somewhat of a non-factor. He's playing on one leg. So, again, you hate to not have a solid prediction, but I really just think it all depends on if KD plays. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree, man. I mean, Kevin Durant, arguably one, if not the best player, one of the best players in the NBA, especially on the offensive end. I mean, it would make a huge difference having that guy in your lineup. And it's clear after seeing Game 1 that is the case. You know, one of the things that surprised me, Coach, is Toronto's defense. They did a great job out on the perimeter, specifically three-point range. Like, they were pushing the Warriors more towards that mid-range area. And man, if they can keep that up, man, I think they got a real shot here. I was pretty shocked. I didn't think this was going to be an easy series. I thought it would be close, but I definitely agree with your take, man. Coach, so one of the things that does worry me is we haven't seen Durant on the court at all. He's not working out on the court. For sure, he's going to miss this next game. And Coach, even if he comes back for Game 3, I mean, he hasn't been on the court for a while. Is he going to be 100%? I mean, what kind of Kevin Durant do you think we'd be getting, even if he does return for like Game 3 or 4?
Well, and that's the question. I mean, from last week's show, if you remember, I had just gotten back from San Francisco and had listened to those guys talking, and I think everybody sort of prior to that was thinking, okay, KD will be back, pretty quick here in the finals. But, based on what they had said last week was spot on, that he was out the first 2 games for sure. He was going to be, rehabbing, and they were going to try to get him back at some point in the series, which did not sound very promising. So, I don't know. I mean, those kind of injuries, are difficult, and I'm not sure. Again, they're keeping it in the dark, and we'll see how he is. I mean, Kevin Durant at 75% is as good as probably any other player. So even if he does come back and has some legs about him, I think he can be a difference maker.
That I love that take, and I agree with that, man. Even if Durant's not 100%, he's so good, especially on the offensive end, that he'll still make a difference. And Coach, I'm just happy we got a series, man. I'm just happy that this is going to be a really, really interesting series. Toronto, man, when they were firing like they were last night, uh, they can hang with anybody. They can hang with anyone. I mean, Marc Gasol, Siakam, Ibaka even contributing. Van Vliet, man, where has this guy been, Coach? Where was this guy all year? They were on sports radio. They were kind of making fun of, I guess, ever since his kid was born. He's been on
Yes.
a tear. He's been on fire. So, hey, I guess he should have had a kid sooner. But
Yeah.
yeah, man, this is great. This is outstanding. You mentioned that Kawhi didn't even have a monster game. Coach, they didn't even get a really big game out of Kyle Lowry. He only had 7 points. Did have 9 assists and 6 rebounds, so still contributing. But he wasn't a key guy on the offensive end, and they were still able to beat the Warriors. So this looked really good.
I
Yeah, and
agree. That's
and
the key point. Not to interrupt you. I'm sorry. The key point for me is that exact thing. I mean, there was no, in some of those early games, like against Philly and stuff, it was Kawhi or die. But somehow the rest of these guys have all been lifted up to believe in what's going on, and they're all just playing their tails off. And I'll tell you, I was thinking about it last night. I honestly can't remember a more raucous home crowd than that. I couldn't even hear the announcers for the first quarter. That was really
Coach,
cool.
you were just reading my mind. That's where I was about to go next, man. What an advantage it is to play these first two games on this Toronto home court, man. That fan base, that Jurassic Park outside of the building, that fan base is incredible, man. And you know, um, getting these two games at home, it could be the momentum that they need to just get a good start on this series. And we're seeing it so far after game one. And man, Coach, I can't wait to see how the rest of this plans out. Game two Sunday. Why do they wait so long? After game one, I don't know, especially since it's in the same building. I was hoping we'd see a game tomorrow, but I think game two is on Sunday. Coach, I'm looking forward to it, man. It should be a lot of fun. Any closing thoughts on the NBA Finals?
No, I think it's going to be a really fun series to watch. I agree with you. I agree. It's been they're really stretching out the playoffs. My goodness, it seems like there's one game per week anymore. It's crazy. So I'm not sure. They're always complaining about the regular season is too compact, and maybe they need to stretch the regular season a little and shorten the
Yeah.
playoffs. I mean, how much? I don't. But again, guys are playing at beyond 100%, and you do need some rest time to have your main guys back. But it's gonna be
Yeah,
fun.
and this these rest in between games should definitely favor the Warriors because gives Durant more time to come back. And we saw Andre Iguodala suffer some kind of minor injury there to his leg towards the end of that game, which was really concerning because they can't
Yeah.
afford to miss him. And so getting these extra days. Hopefully he'll be 100%. Like I think he already said he doesn't plan on missing game two. So I would not expect to see him out of the lineup. But anyways, Coach, fun stuff. Great game one, man. I'm just glad we've got a good series because I did not want it to be just a Warriors blowout. And so I'm just really happy we're watching some great basketball. It's always great. All right, Coach, our assignment for this week, was the Detroit Pistons. And Coach, I got to be honest with you. The Detroit Pistons, at least from a fantasy standpoint, were not my favorite team. And the main reason is, Coach, you got two guys who were great. Andre Drummond, Blake Griffin. It's clear they made improvements, took steps forward in their game, which I love to see. Two studs. Blake Griffin was outstanding. Love the fact that he kind of changed his game, became a good outside shooter, a great passer. Loved seeing that. But Coach, other than those two guys, really tough to rely on anybody else on this team. And on top of that, there weren't a lot of storylines or narratives to watch on this team from a fantasy standpoint. You know, Reggie Jackson has kind of proven to me to be not an elite point guard, so not someone that I looked for fantasy. And then they had a glut of wing players in Luke Kennard, Wayne Ellington, Langston Galloway that would show up for a game or two, but would never really put consistent quality games together. So, Coach, I was a little disappointed when we got the Detroit Pistons here today, but let's talk about them, man. What do you think about this team?
Well, I obviously with you, I think you're right on the nose with the situation there. I was a little more excited for the Pistons going into the season because they hired Dwayne Casey, who is just coming off the a rookie of the year, or I'm sorry, coach of the year, and getting fired from Toronto, which was a very odd combination. But look how that turned out. Everybody was complaining about Toronto firing him, and Nurse has the team in the finals. So it goes to show you got to wait and see how it plays out before you can pass judgment. But I think Casey's a good coach. The Van Gundy years were a disaster there. He's just not a good player, manager, coach. So I think, this year was sort of maybe get used to Casey's system. Blake Griffin was hurt. And I'll tell you, to have Blake Griffin and Drummond to build around, that's some serious stuff, man. Those two guys are all-stars. And so it's a reset situation for them. They were piecemealing a lot of these NBA veteran guys that have gone around the league, like you had mentioned, the Galloways and Ellingtons, and he sort of split time at point with Ish Smith, and Reggie Jackson was their main guy. But I think really none of those guys are the answer. I know they're going to stick with Kennard because he's a super young guy, and he did throw some 20 and 30-point games up on the board toward the end of the year. So I think he may be somebody that's going to give them, some help. But, I've read a lot of different feeds from the Detroit organization and some of their beat reporters talking about free agents and trades. And I think, no one had anything concrete, but I would expect there to be a major shakeup there. Casey had this season to really evaluate all the players, and I think he likes to build teams around solid defense, like he's done in his last couple of stops. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you see them go after some defensive stoppers and one perimeter scorer that would fit in, with Griffin and Drummond, because the East isn't the strongest, as we all know, and you can easily jump in there with a 5th or 6th seed and make a run. So I don't, as a Detroit, if you're a Detroit fan, I wouldn't be certainly as down on them as a lot of the other teams out there. I think there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Now it's just a question is how well do they manage their off season as far as free agents and trades? That's going to be the key. And the draft.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, man. You cannot come back to next season with the same exact team, right? Like, it's clear, I feel, that they need to upgrade their point guard position. As you said, they were kind of flip-flopping between Reggie Jackson and Ish Smith. None of those guys really solidifying themselves as the guy. And coach, at the trade deadline, there were a lot of rumors that they were going to make a run at Mike Conley. And I loved this, the idea of this move, because I think Mike Conley is the perfect type of point guard for this team. Great defender, gritty guy, pass first type of point guard, right? I think he would fit in really well next to Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond. I was really disappointed when they didn't make that move. And I was hearing, rumor was that the Grizzlies really wanted Luke Kennard in a deal for Mike Conley, and the Pistons did not want to let him go, which is understandable, right? Because as you said, Coach, had some great games during the season where he looked really good. I think he could be a pretty nice pro in the future, a really good starter in the future. So, I really hope they upgrade that point guard position. I think it's clear they need to go another direction there. And I do, I'm going to be really optimistic right now, Coach. Um, I love Blake Griffin, Andre Drummond. Your front court is set. You can add a point guard. They do have some interesting young pieces. Glenn Robinson, third. Thon Maker is on this roster. We talked about Luke Kennard already. I love your take, man. It's like if you can just add another solid guy, maybe get a couple of role players. You mentioned how weak the East is. I think this team, they could possibly, man, I'm not going to say contender, but they could be right there, like right after there. They could definitely make the playoffs, maybe make it into that second round of the playoffs at least. So, I don't know, man. It's an interesting team. Really curious to see what they're going to do here in the free agency off-season period, trade, the NBA draft as well. What are your thoughts, Coach?
Yeah, I mean it's a super difficult team to evaluate at this point. I would love to to go back around to the teams that we've worked on thus far and revisit them, like after not before the season starts, obviously, but after the draft and major free agent time comes up, because everything right now is just a rumor. I mean, they have their coach in place. That's a key chip that they didn't have before. They have their two best players, and they're so they've got a base to build off of. But everything else is just so incredibly up in the air. It's amazing. I mean, it's you can read and report and guess all you want, but they are actively, the only thing I know for sure is they're actively out there looking for trades, and they're actively out there really trying to sign some free agents that can help them get to the next level. So, is Detroit a destination that people want to go to? They opened a beautiful brand new stadium last year. Casey is a player's coach. Everybody loves playing for Dwayne Casey. They know Griffin and Drummond are the real deal. So, like I say, I would put them in the middle of the pack in the NBA as far as where they are going into next year, because they do have some reasons and possibilities and options to put together a really competitive team. And somebody just has to push the right buttons within that organization. They need to work together as a GM and coach and really approach some of these guys. I can't see them getting obviously any of the big players like the KDs and Kyries and Lowry and Kawhis, but there's a lot of really good second flight guys. There's if you have a chance to look through the free agent list of the guys that are just open, unrestricted on the open market, I'll tell you what, you could make a pretty damn good team out of the 10th through 15th guy. So if they can get a few of those guys to fit in, and they buy in the Casey system, I'm with you, man. I think the Pistons have a chance to be a decent ball club.
We have the draft coming up here, just I think in a few weeks, 3 weeks or so. And, the Pistons have the number 15 pick in this draft. 15, not a super exciting spot to pick. You're out of the top 10. But there are some interesting names that could be available. I don't know if a guy like Brandon Clark from Gonzaga can fall that far, but Bol center out of Oregon, is slated to go around that range. Kevin Porter Jr. out of USC. I like Nasir Little is supposed to go in that range. So there are some interesting guys that could be available for the Pistons to draft at that range. So, Coach, I'm really excited to get into the draft with you in the next few weeks. But really curious to see what happens there. And then one last thing I want to talk about, Coach, is Blake Griffin had some minor knee surgery this offseason. He has a pretty extensive history of knee issues. He had arthroscopic left knee surgery. Now we're hearing it's pretty minor, and that he's not expected to miss any off-season work. So it doesn't sound anything to be really super concerned about. But Coach, I want to say, does that concern you at all from a fantasy standpoint? Would you stay away from him? He really exceeded my expectations this past season, Coach. He's usually a guy that I stay away from due to the injury history and due to I wasn't a big fan of his game in the past, but I really love what I saw from him this year. Was really great passer this year. What do you think about him from a fantasy standpoint and with the injury concern?
Well, I'm a huge Blake Griffin fan, and I'll tell you why. That's a guy that had some extreme weaknesses in his game. If you remember, initially he was he was a terrible foul shooter. I mean, below 50%, and he couldn't shoot the ball outside of 12 feet. And I mean, there were massive things in his game. I think as much as he could jump and dunk and be flashy, but over the years, man, that dude he's made himself into a very decent foul shooter. He's a tremendous facilitator. If you watch the Pistons play, they ran everything through him. He sees the floor really well. He's a legit 3-point shooter. I'm super impressed with the guy with what he's done with his game. So, if you take him, look at his fantasy value, that guy brings it in all the categories: assists, obviously rebounds and points, but he's doing all the other pieces, steals, and you're not going to find a guy that plays any harder. So, as far as the injuries go, yes, that's a risk. He's never had really a catastrophic where he's blown something out, to the point where, guys aren't the same. It's always been a nick here or, a little meniscus here. Those things do add up as you get older, but nothing that I think is going to stop him from being an all-star. And on top of that, I love the grit of a player. And the fact that he came in and played in the playoffs this year, literally on one leg. I mean, he couldn't bend his knee. He was dragging the leg up and down the court, and he was contributing. So I'm not afraid to take him. Everything I've read, he's going to be 100% for off-season workouts. There were even talks, if he felt good enough, that he was going to try out for some of the USA basketball stuff. So don't be afraid of Griffin. I also am a big Drummond fan. There's another guy that went from a 46% foul shooter to like 72% and really got a hold of his game. I think Blake Griffin was a great influence on him. So, keep those two guys high on your draft board because they're definitely going to be big usage guys. And if they get a few pieces around them, I think they'll even be stronger players. So I'm in the Blake camp, man.
I'm really happy that you just mentioned Andre Drummond. Want to talk about him just for a quick second. Finished 15th in total value in 9 category leagues. Averaged 17 points a game, 15 rebounds, 1 assist, almost 2 blocks, 1.7 steals, shot 53% from the field. Now, his Achilles heel might still be his free throw shooting, where I believe he shot 59% from the line. So maybe the one spot he held you back. But man, getting 15 overall value from a guy you likely drafted somewhere in like the 3rd or 4th round is outstanding. So love your take on Andre Drummond, man. I just love, Coach, I love when guys improve. I love when it's clear that guys are working in the off season, taking the time to get better. Like, I always respect that, and I always love to see that. And it's clear that these two guys are doing that. And so, love your take, Coach. I think both guys for fantasy. I'll probably still kind of be wary of Blake, only just because I'm wondering if his value gets inflated, where he gets taken a little earlier than he usually does due to the good season he had last year and his improvement. So I'll probably still not have Blake on many teams, but if I need a center, I'm cool with taking Andre Drummond, man. That guy's awesome. All right, Coach. I don't know, man. Any closing thoughts on the Detroit Pistons before we wrap this up?
I would say that, again, I'm looking forward to doing a show with you, once the draft and free agent cycle is done, because then we can really fill in the blanks with what direction they're going. But, keep an eye on them. They're a sleeper. No one's talking about them at all. And they do have, when you have your front office in place and a couple of star players to basis to work with, that's half the battle right there. So it'll be fun to watch. I think don't be surprised if they don't try to trade up in the draft a little bit. I've heard a few rumblings of that. They were after had an eye on a few guys that may go in the top 5 or 6, not obviously Zion or anything, but a few of the secondary guys. And so, they're going to be active in a lot of things they're doing. And I think, my take would be, I think the opposite with Blake. I think he's going to sink down in drafts because people are afraid of him getting injured all the time. And people don't think Detroit's going to be that good. He'll be he's already on my list for one of my value guys that you can get a little bit later than normal. And I want to mention one more thing on Drummond too. He had a bad streak at the end of the year there where his free throw shooting plummeted down, but it was up for a while. It was up almost 15, 18 points, somewhere in that neighborhood from last year. So it's something that he's showing improvement on. So don't sell those guys short just because it's a team that's not on many people's radar, because sometimes those are the guys. I know Drummond was on my one championship team this year. And like you said, when you get a guy that can throw 20 and 20 on the board a bunch of times, there's not many of those guys that exist out there. So it'll be fun to watch. I think that it's, again, just, the NBA has a way of just being relevant all the time. So keep on studying and listening. And if you want to catch me on Twitter, I'm at Joe Sarvadi. That's JoeSarvadi. I also go by Coach on there, and throw us some questions. We'll put them on and start talking things up. And once we get the draft in here in a few weeks, we can really start doing some much better idea of who's going to be where and how it's going to all play together. But appreciate it, man. It's a great series. Look forward to Sunday and wrapping up stuff with you next week. How can they reach you, big fella?
Hit me up. I'm at Adrian Benjamins. As Coach said, shoot us your questions and comments. We'd love to answer any questions you guys got to end our shows. And thank you guys so much for listening, supporting the show. We'll be back next week. talking more finals, I'm sure, Coach. I'm really curious to see how that shakes out. Coach, I'm really excited to get more in depth on the upcoming draft. I cannot wait to talk about these incoming guys. I'm excited about a lot of these prospects. So can't wait to talk more of that with you and just get into some more stuff in this during the summer, man. So stick with us, and we'll see you guys next week.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.